When we think of epic tales, we tend to picture the hero standing with a sword raised. They're the ones who save kingdoms, slay dragons, and get remembered in songs. But what if we've been looking at the story all wrong? What if the real engine of emotional depth, character transformation, and audience connection isn't the hero at all, but the sidekick? Welcome to the underappreciated world of the sidekick, the quiet emotional glue of great storytelling, and no one embodies this role more powerfully than Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. Far from being just Frodo's gardener-turned-traveling companion, Sam is the heart of the story, the soul of Middle-earth, and the psychological anchor that holds everything and everyone together. Gamgee is the perfect mirror to Frodo Baggins. As Frodo is increasingly consumed by the burden of the ring and pulled toward darkness, Sam remains a constant with his loyalty unshaken and his values intact. Sam's presence allows the audience to see just how far Frodo has strayed. Without Sam, Frodo's descent would be abstract, but in Sam's wide, honest eyes, we feel the moral distance growing between them, and it terrifies us. In this way, the sidekick isn't simply a supporting player, they're a crucial psychological device. They externalize the hero's internal battle. Moreover, heroes are often larger than life. They're destined, chosen, and marked by greatness. This makes them hard to relate to. Frodo is a ring bearer, burdened by an evil artifact with world-ending power. That's not something most people can emotionally connect with, but Sam is just like us. He's afraid, tired, and misses home. He doesn't seek glory, but help. He's clumsy, kind, deeply human. Through Sam, we as readers or viewers stay emotionally connected to the narrative. He reacts the way we would react, grounding the story in emotional realism. This grounding is important because without a character like Sam, a high fantasy like The Lord of the Rings risks becoming abstract and inaccessible. With him, the story becomes deeply personal. From a psychological perspective, loyalty is one of the most deeply resonant human traits. Evolutionarily, it binds tribes and families. Emotionally, it signals safety and unconditional support. In storytelling, loyalty serves as a narrative compass, and sidekicks are often its purest embodiment. Sam's loyalty is borderline absurd. Frodo repeatedly pushes him away. He's cruel, suspicious, and poisoned by Gollum's manipulations, and still, Sam climbs Mount Doom behind him, risking death just for the chance to be helpful. But why do we love this so much? You see, loyalty in the face of rejection is the emotional goldmine of storytelling. It evokes a longing we all have for someone to stay with us even when we are at our worst. Sam gives Frodo, and by extension us viewers, that gift. He shows us what love and friendship look like when they're not transactional. Psychologists know that we are hardwired to root for the underdog. It's part empathy, part rebellion, and part identification. Heroes are idealized, sidekicks are real. They struggle, they fail, and rise anyway. Contrary to what most storytelling templates suggest, the sidekick often drives the emotional arc of the narrative. The hero goes through transformation, but the sidekick often provides the emotions that make that transformation possible. In Frodo's case, it's Sam's presence that allows him to hang on to his humanity. Frodo doesn't survive the journey because he's strong. He survives it because Sam never stops believing he can. Meanwhile, this emotional arc doesn't end at Mount Doom. It continues in the bittersweet resolution. When Frodo sails into the West, it's Sam who returns home, Sam who marries, Sam who rebuilds, Sam who remembers. The hero finishes the quest as the sidekick lives its aftermath, and that, psychologically, hits harder than any battle scene. In group dynamics and Jungian archetypes, support characters often carry the psychological weight of stability. They are the ones who allow the system to function without demanding attention. In real life, we overlook people like Sam all the time, but when they disappear, everything collapses. If the hero reflects our aspirations, the sidekick reflects our reality. We are rarely Frodo. We are more often Sam, and that's okay, because Sam proves that you don't need a magical destiny to make a difference. This is where the storytelling psychology hits hardest. Sam's journey teaches us that presence is power, that being kind when the world is cruel is strength, that carrying another when they cannot carry themselves is the purest form of bravery. The same is thought about Robin. When the bat signal flashes across the Gotham sky, we don't think of the sidekick, we think of the Dark Knight. But in the long-running psychological experiment that is Batman's story, it's not the hero who evolves most dramatically, it's the sidekick. In fact, Robin, like many sidekicks, might matter more than the hero. Not because he's stronger, but because he complicates the narrative in the best way possible. Heroes are often rigid, sidekicks are disruptive, and in that disruption lies growth, conflict, and emotional charge. In psychological development, especially in adolescence where most Robins begin, identity formation is key. In narrative terms, this plays out with the sidekick grappling not only with their own selfhood, but with how much of the hero's identity they're supposed to emulate. Robin isn't just helping Batman fight crime, he's trying to figure out who he is in relation to Batman. and that dynamic is often unstable. Unlike the hero, whose purpose is usually locked in by tragedy or destiny, the sidekick often enters the story mid-arc, forced to build themselves while orbiting someone who seems fully formed. Robin's journey isn't about defeating crime, it's about discovering whether he's supposed to become Batman or resist becoming Batman. This tension is psychologically electric. We don't watch Robin because he's perfect, we watch to see if he'll collapse under the weight of the Bat myth or surpass it. However, heroes rarely change. They symbolize something fixed: justice, sacrifice, hope. Batman is a statue carved from grief. He doesn't bend, but sidekicks bend constantly. This fluidity allows for one of the most compelling arcs in storytelling psychology: mentorship inversion, which happens when the sidekick grows and the hero remains static, eventually making the sidekick more human, more relatable, and dare we say, more heroic. Dick Grayson, the original Robin, eventually becomes Nightwing. He literally leaves the Batcave behind, not because he stops believing in justice, but because he evolves beyond Bruce Wayne's limited emotional framework. He retains the skills, the discipline, the mission, but tempers it with compassion and independence. In doing so, Robin becomes the only person who can challenge Batman without being a villain. That dynamic, when the junior role reverses the emotional authority in the story, is rare. This is why most sidekicks bleed more, not necessarily in physical terms, but emotionally. The hero is often emotionally armored, either because of trauma, training, or narrative stubbornness. Batman doesn't break down. Superman doesn't second guess. These are icons. Sidekicks, on the other hand, are narratively expendable, and they know it. Their emotional arcs are dangerous because they aren't the chosen one. They don't get plot armor, and they can die. That injects real tension into the story, so we care more. When a Robin charges into battle, we worry in a way we never do for Batman. Sidekicks create this discomfort by introducing emotional warmth, idealism, or vulnerability into a world that's often built around grim seriousness. Batman's presence in Gotham introduces a form of narrative contradiction. How can a child in red and green survive in a place like this? That question charges his story. Robin forces the audience to confront the absurdity and tragedy of Batman's world. He's not a sidekick so much as an open wound stitched into the bat symbol. Every version of Robin introduces different tensions into Batman's life. For instance, Dick Grayson challenges Bruce emotionally, pushing him toward connection. Jason Todd represents the failure of Batman's method of revenge without redemption. Tim Drake brings deductive brilliance and moral balance, reminding Bruce of the why behind the mission. And Damian Wayne embodies legacy and control, forcing Bruce to confront the cost of his choices. Each of these dynamics destabilizes Batman's rigid moral code. In psychology, this is similar to a catalyst relationship, where a person who, simply by existing near you, compels your psychological evolution. Without Robin, Batman becomes static. With Robin, he is forced to reflect, reconsider, and sometimes even reboot. Here's one trick about heroes in long-running stories: they can't afford too much emotional complexity. Their role is symbolic. Batman needs to stay brooding. Sherlock Holmes needs to stay brilliant. That means someone else in the story has to carry the emotional luggage. So Robin laughs, cries, falls in love, argues, fails, seeks approval, gets hurt, and gets back up. His arc allows the narrative to explore emotions the hero cannot afford to touch. This is especially evident in other storytelling like comics, where the emotional realism of the sidekick humanizes the entire universe. Most importantly, every hero lives at the extremes. They're millionaires, gods, time travelers, lone wolves. Their problems are rarely ours, but sidekicks are usually messy. They stumble into greatness by accident, by need, or by circumstance. They learn how to survive alongside legends. Robin is the gateway drug to Batman. He makes the story feel accessible, and when he grows, we feel it, because we've seen every fragile step of the journey. Robin let us believe we could belong in the hero's world too, not as icons, but as ourselves. While heroes don't get to fail, sidekicks do, and that's why they often mean more to us. Because in every stumble, punchline, scar, and comeback, they show us what it really takes to walk alongside greatness and become something greater. But this doesn't apply only to action characters. In the theater of detective fiction, Sherlock Holmes is the undisputed star, brilliant, eccentric, and always 5 steps ahead of the criminal mind. But as anyone who's truly read the stories, the emotional and narrative gravity doesn't center on Holmes. It's Watson, the good doctor, the loyal chronicler, the man in the shadow of genius who somehow steals the light anyway. In fact, Watson isn't just a sidekick. He's the psychological scaffold that makes the entire Holmes mythos work. Without Watson, Sherlock Holmes would be a cold, unrelatable machine. With him, the stories become human, believable, and emotionally resonant. If Sherlock Holmes is the mind, Watson is the heart. In psychology, particularly in narrative theory, there's a concept known as the reader surrogate, where a character represents the audience inside the story. This is Watson to a T. He reacts with awe, frustration, confusion, admiration, even a bit of fear. He's not perfect, not Superman. He's a decorated army doctor with a limp and a large dose of emotional intelligence. Without Watson standing next to Holmes, we would feel alienated alienated. Watson asks the questions we're too shy to raise. More than that, he feels for us. Sherlock rarely emotes and doesn't mourn victims, but when Watson grieves, we're given permission to do the same. Without Watson, the audience would be intellectually impressed by Holmes, but with Watson, we become emotionally invested in him. Many heroes are often emotional extremes, and Sherlock Holmes is no exception. He's either manic with inspiration or inert with boredom. He plays the violin at 2 a.m. He injects cocaine when he's unstimulated. He forgets the Earth revolves around the sun because it's not relevant to his work. That is not stable behavior. In family systems theory, there is often a stabilizer, a person who unconsciously regulates the emotional temperature of a volatile figure. That's Watson. He's the one brewing tea while Holmes ricochets between obsession and ennui. He's the presence that stops the genius from flying too close to the sun or plunging too deep into madness. Watson's emotional steadiness allows Holmes to function. In turn, it allows the story to function. Without Watson as a buffer, the reader would be emotionally whiplashed by Holmes' extremes. That's no small thing. It's the sidekick's unseen superpower. It's easy to think of Watson as the simple one in contrast to Sherlock's baroque brilliance, but simplicity is deceptive. Watson's strength lies in his emotional nuance, not his intellectual fireworks. He's not trying to outthink Holmes. He's trying to connect with him. That effort, often brushed aside or taken for granted in the stories, is the emotional engine behind their partnership. When Watson is wounded in The Sign of Four, Holmes shows uncharacteristic concern. When Watson marries and moves out, Holmes' detachment is clearly a mask. The emotional complexity is all mediated through Watson's quiet dignity, his underdog nature, his endless patience, his refusal to leave the man, even when the man is maddening. Watson represents something psychologically precious, the competent everyman. He's not there to dazzle, he's there to understand, and that's rarer and more difficult than it seems. Sidekicks are often mirror characters, but not in the obvious way. They don't reflect what the hero is, but what the hero isn't willing to confront. This is why Watson reflects to Holmes the things he suppresses: empathy, friendship, vulnerability, even morality. Sherlock famously claims not to be bound by emotion, but it's Watson's emotional compass that often stops Holmes from going overboard. Watson reminds us that intelligence divorced from compassion can become cruelty, and Holmes, despite his protests, is always aware of this. Here is a paradox that the hero often has no arc. Sherlock Holmes doesn't really grow. He learns facts, solves cases, but rarely changes in meaningful ways. But Watson does. Watson grows from a recovering soldier with no purpose into a man with deep conviction. He marries, struggles, and worries about Holmes. He disagrees with him, challenges him, leaves and returns. He evolves, and in doing so, he subtly shifts the entire tone of the narrative over time. This is one of the most underappreciated truths in psychology. The sidekick often tracks the audience's emotional arc because they're the ones allowed to change. Even though Holmes may not admit it, Watson is his tether to the human race, and not just emotionally. Existentially, Watson is the only person who sees the full arc of Holmes' life, the keeper of his legacy, his literal biographer. In this way, he becomes the protector of Holmes' soul. Without Watson, Holmes vanishes from the world. He becomes a myth, but Watson turns him into a man worth remembering. While Sherlock Holmes may be the mind of the story, Watson is the main reason the story matters in the first place.